Again, we're going to check what we have seen before as a summary, and then we'll dive in more depth. Okay, so the objective is always to solve the terminological part of the country node. These and all the applications that are needed for the Conectaton. There's one in particular that is the terminology server, which is the one that will allow you to do the necessary translations to create standard documents. The challenge is that you have in your system different coding systems. And when you want to share the document internationally, that needs to be translated to the internationally acceptable codes. The two documents are vaccinations and the IPS. When you look at the implementation guides, as we have just said, you will see which codes you need. If you're already using a coding system, which is the recommended coding, or in the implementation guide, it's relatively easy. You just put your code in the right place in the resource, and that's it. But if not, then you're going to have to translate towards that international code when creating the document. And then from that document, when you receive a document from another country. So you need to understand it and you need to include it. But for that, you need to translate it. Of course, when you get an interoperability document, you can simply deploy it on the screen. And it might work, but it's a very basic model. A little more detailed just means that you have to use the information that is in that electronic document and to include it in the database in the clinical system. So if you're reporting a patient that has allergies that are, who I don't know and has certain diagnosis, then we should have like a reconciliation screen that says, I get this information from the other country, from the other region, from another hospital, and do you want to reuse any of this information? And then the physician should be able to say, yes, such and such diagnosis or these allergies or those vaccinations should be included or can be included in our systems. So we need to do some back mapping. You receive the international coding and it has to go to get the local code. So how do we do that following the best practices so that it's scalable? Because of course you could have 1,000 tables that map from one way to the other, but it's so much better if you have a procedure that can be reproduced. And that means using a terminology server. In today's example, we're going to be using Snowstorm, which is an open source terminology server with advanced features to provide support to SNOMED. If you use Happy, which is also part of the node, it has a terminology server and it's very easy to load ICD-10. It works well. And in fact, you can even load a SNOMED, but some consultations, some searches are slow or it doesn't understand some more advanced languages. So in order to use SNOMED more robustly, in order to do all the mapping and all of that, in general, we use a specialized terminology server. And for this, we have open sources and commercial servers too. In the Conectaton, we use this one, which is for free, which is open source, which is developed by SNOMED International. But there are several others that are commercial, that are off the shelf, and that are very good. Some countries that have contracts or companies that need to have a certain level of, or countries that need to have a certain level of support. And you can call, send out an email, and you get a ticket. Sometimes it's good to have this outsourced, and this is that's often done then with a commercial server, or sometimes with an open source too. But the idea is that any of these servers, so whether it's the Happy standard, the SNOMED from the SNOMED International Snowstorm, is that they all use the same API so that it works with the local servers. And back you can have I mean, if you have a commercial server, if the commercial server has the same API that you have, which is Fire API, then you establish that connection, you get an URL, and you change the system so that it points to the new server, and the transactions are the same ones. That's the advantage. Although it's a totally different technology, if it's Fire, the transactions are the same ones. So again, the advantage of Snowstorm is that as it grows, it has already been around for several years. In the beginning, it was only for SNOMED, and now it allows to include other terminology, local codes, other code systems, or all the value sets and other concept maps. The architecture in general, if we have to see what's actually in the Docker, is the following. Snowstorm is in the middle. This is a base that is elastic. It's a document that is not relational. It's simply based on documents that has certain advantages, and all the representations of the concepts are standardized in that database. And that's one of the strategies. Instead of having the relations in the process of importing, there are compositions of the data which are pre-connected, indexes are created, so it's prepared to quickly answer certain searches, certain consultations. It's based on documents, and it doesn't have any terms in it. It's just a terminology server which uses the Fire API. If you want to save the terminology, you can save it in there. So it has the Spanish SNOMED terminology. You can use the one from your country. And another way of feeding the snowstorm is by using Fire packages. When you see a Fire implementation guide, that can usually be exported as packages. And that Fire package can have many things in it. The profiles of the Fire resources, and also the restrictions, what vocabulary can use in the technology bindings in each of the fields. And you can also include the terminology from the code systems, value sets, and concept maps. So it's one common way, an easy way to share vocabulary that are used in interoperability. Interoperability used to be defined as a PDF, as a manual. You used to say, we need to connect to this interoperability to this country or to this network. And you had to have a whole set of manuals to understand what to do. And you had to send out Excels and put them in tables and then mapping the vocabulary. You know, Nowadays, the modern way of doing that is to package all of those interoperability rules in a Fire package. The API REST from Snowstorm, now it's native, it's part of the Snowstorm configuration, allows you to upload the terminology. We tell that API we can do the importing, we put SNOMED into it, or we sometimes can include this Fire package. When Snowstorm receives that through the API, it processes it, it indexes it. The initial load is actually, well, quite slow. It can take up to even 40 minutes. But it's quite long, but what it does is pre-combine things in order to optimize the later use of the data. And this is all stored in Elastic. Once this upper part isn't done, which is the maintenance for starting up this Snowstorm is available to work in production. And for this, it exposes an API Fire, which is a standardized one that we always talk about. And any terminology can be reduced because remember that it's a code systems that has value sets and which has relationships with other terminologies, and they're called concept maps. And with that, you can represent any concept map. You can have different attributes, different relations, etc. But basically what Fire does is to standardize what is a terminology in these three classes. And that's what we always say, representing a vocabulary with a coded text vocabulary to represent it as a code system, value set, and concept map is a great advance. It gives you much more flexibility. In a code text table, there are things that don't fit in, synonyms, attributes, complex hierarchies don't fit in. You have to invent new fields to represent that in a database. Whereas code system, value set, and concept maps allow you to represent from a small table that can be used for radiology, or including all the 500,000 concepts of a snowstorm, ICD-10, ICD-11, LOINC, you name it. So it's a standard, which means that you don't have to think about this. It's basically does it like that. And for you to see how it works, which is part of the package that you have, you use that API in order to show the SNOMED content in general with all the details. It uses the native API, not the API Fire, and the Swagger. These are all operations that you will be carrying out in the Conectaton. So we said the first piece of work that a country has to do in order to participate in the Conectaton, using best practices for managing terminology, using terminological service, is using the mapping to the local codes. And this spreadsheet that we've talked about has, or in the first sheet, it has the name of the local code system. This is a fake name that you can see here in blue. Obviously, you can change it. You can change the domain or anything. Remember, we always say this, the Fire uses URIs. It's not a URL. It's not something that you put in a browser. It's a URI. It's a way of identifying the vocabulary. It uses a domain, a Ministry of Health, a terminology, and then that text becomes an identifier. And this assumes that the 6 tabs are 6 different sections of local vocabulary. And in this local vocabulary, we have different parts. The first 2 columns, which says codes and background information, these are reference code. That is the Raxel vocabulary, so as to speak, in order to be a pivot, so in order to make sure what all the countries should harmonize towards. Clinical cases that have been defined, for example, for the Connectathon, these list of codes for clinical information, for example, that we have represented here, these and we give them a code, which is the code internally for the Connectathon purposes. No one's actually going to use that. It's simply a code just to be able to differentiate them. Then each of you has to see how they use those codes within the country. So sure, this is the diabetes mellitus is the first one. What do you call it? If you have a local code, then you put that in columns D and E. See if it's your local code, which is applied by you. It's not ICD-10 and it's not SNOMED. Then that's the one that you write in there. If you use ICD-10, it's already there. You can leave that local term there. You don't have one, but it's already mapped to ICD-10. So H1 is already mapped to ICD-10. And it's M45. And it's also mapped to SNOMED. H1 is mapped to 466-35009. It's the same pathology. So this is a shortcut that we're giving you. If you're using SNOMED ICD-10 in your systems, then you have the mapping ready. You have to do nothing really. When you move forward with these tabs, you can see that you put vaccinations. For example, this is the local code and it's important for you to change it. This is just a very basic example on what the process would be like for mapping and for the integration of your data and the requirements of an interoperability network. In this case, for the PH4H. This is an interoperability framework similar to the one that the European Union is doing and also in the United States, or I think also in Australia. You need to adapt to an interoperability framework, and then the first thing that you need to do then is on the terminology, see the codes that you use and see how they match to the international ones for procedures, for allergies. In the case of allergies, there is no ICD-10 because there are no ICD-10 code for that, only diagnosis. So these columns are blank. You have to do nothing. Here, what you would have to do is simply to edit these local codes in order to do the harmonization. Once you have this, what you need to do is to convert this spreadsheet into file resources. And that is done by executing the Python script. We're going to see here, hold on, allow me show you the Python script.
Vamos a mirarlo acá. Acá le hacemos un clear. Vamos a ver que les comparto. Este es el script de Python que convierte.
This is the Python script which changes. So here we have the testing data that is used in the Conectaton. It's in the same folder. I can scroll upward and here we've got Python 3 and we have the XLX. When executing that, you can see that it takes almost no time and it tells you that the script is disabled and that the package has been saved. If I want to load that in Snowstorm, you can see here that we have a curl with this file here, and it'll go to the local host fire admin load package. With that operation, then I can upload the file inside the Snowstorm. If I want to see what is in the file, and we can take a look at it here, we can look in the Finder. Let me share so that you can take a look at my Finder. Here, these are, I can open it, and within the TGZ, which is a Linux zip, it has a package, JSON, and it has the code systems. This is a fragment of the ICD-10 that we used in the example. This is a fragment of the ICD-11 that uses the codes that we have in ICD-11, local, and also Rexel. Then we have the value sets. These from the local, these are allergies, so it's a subset. SNOMED. When it doesn't say anything, it's because SNOMED. These are allergies. These are local diseases, and then we have the concept maps. They have a direction from CIE10 to local, CIE10 to SNOMED, and so on and so forth. These are all the resources represented. So we get 39 file resources. SNOMED is not counted because it's already created, but the example in the Conectaton in production will tell you that you should have access to SNOMED, ICD-10. Now I have a fragment, also ICD-11, local code system, and the Rexel code system, which is not really necessary for implementation. It's only just part of the mapping. That's all. Then we have all the value sets and then all the concept maps in all the different directions. Each one of those code systems is identified with a URI. If the URIs are identifiers, snowmed.info/SCT, and if this other one that we have here that ends in ICD-10. That's for ICD-10. This is for 11, and these two we have invented. This is for the Conectaton and Terminology. The three ones at the top are official. There is a fire page that tells you which are the URIs for all of those terminologies and all the code systems. Here, Carlos, maybe you want to talk about the vaccinations and that this will change. Yes, thank you, Alejandro. Let me make the comment. If you remember the implementation guide of the vaccination certificate that we used last year in Bogota, it used the ICD-11. Since we are pointing to or trying to leave the countries prepared to go into production with the ICBP in order to get the yellow fever certificate in a digital format as per was agreed in the 2024 event, the new specification, or rather the update of that specification that's coming from the WHO, is using a pre-qualified vaccination code. There is an international standard related to the vaccines that have been approved for that, and we need to align to that. And obviously that impacts us when it comes to our mapping. We have to change at ICD-11 for this pre-qual vaccination list, which are authorized for polio and also for yellow fever. And in the implementation guide, they are not all yet available. We have been requesting the full list of those that have been approved, and it's going to be part of this mapping that we are going to have to do for the 2025 Connectathon. Now, in our planning, we have said in mid-August, we have a webinar dedicated to this. We'll take a look at all the new aspects, and that also implies an update to the Docker associated to the transformation from IPS, considering the logical updated model. And we also need to consider this part of the mapping for the HS cert vaccinations from the WHO. Back to you, Alejandro. So probably that means we're going to have to change the URI. We might not use the one for ICD-10, and we're probably going to use this one for the new vocabulary. We shall have to see how we adapt that so that we have the right names. If you change the codes, it's still going to be called ICD-11. That's the way the script has been done. Now, I remember that this happened in one of the countries, and that is that the local vocabularies or the local codes can be repeated. Because maybe I have a local code for vaccination that starts with 1 all the way up to 90. And then for diagnosis, that starts in 1 and ends in 5,000. So diagnosis 5 is diabetes, and vaccination 5 it might be for chickenpox. So when we had the example, we gave it a different letter. So for vaccinations, it's L. And we follow the sequence. And the first one starts with L1. So here there's no, they're not repeated. And they're not repeated because it's just to make a simple conversion. But if there is, then you're going to have to enable a certain parameter in the Python script to say that you have to make this split. And basically, it says that there is no one single code system that is local, but that there are several, one for every tab that could happen. And then that just creates more files. Instead of 39, it'll be 66 because it has to make the code systems, and now it'll be 9 because it's one additional one for each of the different dimensions or the different tabs. And that means that you have to make more concept maps. In the past, with one concept map, you could put all of the local information with all of SNOMED, and now you have to do one for allergies, one for diagnosis, and another one for vaccine. So it becomes a little bit more complex. It's no longer complicated once you start using it, but at the beginning it is. And if you do that split, then the URI it becomes more specialized. So for diagnosis, it'll be terminology antecedentes. And so it becomes more specialized. And then with the split flag, it's the same thing. Everything is doubled, and you need to make the conversion with the Python, and then you put it in the Snowman. If you're going to update the resources that you've done with the same versions, with the same URIs, then you can simply do it on top. But and you can import it, and if you want to do it with as a single one, and then you want to import it as a multiple one, then you're going to have to redo it. So what we have done here is that we have a Swagger in order for us to be able to carry out tests. And I want to show you what it looks like. This is local host slash browser. It was very difficult to reset this up. So here I'm just showing you the GitHub Rexel. We can look here. It's this one. This is the one, IPS National Backend. There's one branch that says NGIX. And I know that the name is not very intuitive, NGIX Reverse Proxy Setup. And this will go into the master, but in the meantime, you can implement the Docker from this branch. You can clone it. And when cloning it, when you can go to localhost slash browser and you are in Snowmed, it looks like it's the official browser, but it's actually in your own disk. So I can put here, for example, asthma, and all of this is here in my disk, and that's why it's running so fast. This is interesting because sometimes there are users that are using the API of the international browser, and then they're blocked because the international browser that has an API on the back is totally open source. It doesn't require a username or a password. It does have some security to detect abuse, but for example, an excessive use that might damage other users. It's a free service. It's thought to use in production. For example, a script that is looking for all the concepts, downloading them and writing, and for that, then you simply download the file. So it's very common that when people start experimenting with the browser, you end up being blocked. Sometimes you can use an ECL, which is too large, and you end up getting blocked. And this is an interesting system of how you can run it locally. So if you use any Python script, you're never going to block it because it's actually in your computer. And that's why you see that it also works a lot faster. There's no latency. You are the only user. So that's local host slash browser. Now, this local host slash fire is a happy fire, and also we can do it with code system. And you can see that we have here this code system, which is called ICD-10. I can see it in the URI. This is for ICD-11. This is for the Raxel Conectaton. This is local, and this is Nomad. So they have been loaded, and the package has already been uploaded, and that's why it's there. And if you do slash Conectaton Swagger, what you end up getting is this small Swagger, which basically helps you to do the Conectathon operations. So we can see some of the examples and we can do it one by one. Now look, the first example is I want to look at allergies. So we have the local terminologies. Let's say that you're preparing for the Conectathon and you want to make a screen where the users uploads an allergy and then it comes up in the IPS. It's a little more than what the Conectathon actually requires, but let's assume that that's what you want to do. So for this, you need to do an expansion. So you will, every time that you want to look for something, it's an expand of a value set. So let's test it. You try it out. Well, I want to try then local allergies. These are the codes and the words that you have edited. So here I could put here amox, amoxicillin. And here it it runs a search and it says L62 is allergy to
Esa es la forma
amoxicillin.
estandarizada que yo
And
te puedo
this is
indicar
the
a nivel
standardized
global.
way for
Entonces
searching
vos
within a
decís, bueno,
value
pero
set.
quiero buscar
But
ahí
as
lugar
let's say that
C,
that's not where I want to look. I want to look
y
within
y le
SNOMED,
cambio el
same
RIMA,
thing.
cambio el
Amox,
rubric,
it
yo cambio
changes
la
this, but it
etiqueta,
changes the URI, the value set that you're searching for. And here you
no,
have the SNOMED
esto es.
result, is this code.
O si yo quiero decir,
Or
bueno, quiero
if you
buscar,
want to say, let's try and get
acá tengo
this,
cosas de diagnósticos también.
let me look for other
Este es
examples of
este es el
diagnosis.
Snowman, o por ejemplo, lo puedo
Or
hacer al
for
revés.
example, we can do it the
Quiero
other
mi
way
código
around.
local
Let's say that we've
acá
got the local
lo
code
descargo
and
acá
this,
en el Swagger, y yo
let me
quiero
show you the
buscar
Swagger first.
alergia de 10.
If I wanted to
Yo digo,
code with
quiero buscar un
ICD-10,
código
I'm going to look for a
de
diagnosis
CIE10,
of
¿sí?
in ICD-10.
Diagnóstico CIE10 value set, por ejemplo.
See
Quiero ver
ICD-10 value set.
acá yo puedo buscar los que
And
tienen
here we write the ones that
ICD-10
start with
o
DIAP for
buscar
diabetes. I can search and I get MD
Sigue
M45.
siendo interesante esto,
Now,
porque vos
the
decís,
interesting
en
thing
ese
is
código
that we're
hay dos de
looking
todo.
in our
Pero
codes in
ustedes,
SNOMED and
la forma de
ICD-10.
buscar es la misma.
Then
Siempre
the
van a
way of
buscar
searching is the
la
same. We
misma
just
API
changed the
HTTP.
parameter, but it's the same
Pero se
API.
escriben de la misma manera.
And the
Todos los
results
parámetros son
are
value
retrieved
set,
in the same
value
way
set
with a
1,
value set, which has an
de
expansion.
base para poner
It
el
has a total, it has an
parámetro que
offset,
indique qué
it has
versión
a
es la que
parameter
tiene que
which
tener
tells you which
y
version, where it
se
comes from,
complementa con
and
un
it also has the
que tiene la lista de cosas
contains,
que tiene
which
que
has
hacer para buscar
the
diagnóstico.
HL7 list.
Acá se viene
If I write here
Versión,
hyper,
ahí está, hiperuricemia,
there you go,
medicación actual y
hyperuricemia,
beneficiar. Estos son los
hyper.
códigos de CIDS.
There are different
Son códigos
codes in ICD-10,
lo que sí
and
que al usar
what you can that's exactly what you can see when you use the standardization. You have quite some versatility. So the example that we can do with that is we can go one step beyond. We can already look and find information. It can allow me to entry data quickly. So let's say that now I have the code in my allergy systems, L62, and I want to know what the SNOMED is, the SNOMED code is for L62.
estas cosas que yo hago acá desde el Swagger,
And what I'm doing
yo
here
puedo,
from the
el
Swagger,
request URL se copia de acá,
request the
los
URL
URLs,
can be
esos
copied
son
here. So I can
universales.
copy that and I can
Después
copy that,
puedo
paste
hacer
that. And this is a
traducciones
request that I can do from any
o hago
application.
resumen para
The
entender
idea is that I can do it in the Swagger to
lo que
understand what the
quiero
request is like,
dentro de una
and then
aplicación
I can
para
execute it in an
reproducir lo que necesito
application
reproducir, ¿no?
in order to
Entonces, por
reproduce
ejemplo,
the
esto
same
estamos
search.
hablando de
In order to do the
translate, map y
mapping,
translate.
it's no an
Map es
expand,
para
but it's a
expandir,
translate. And the two operations that we're going to focus on are those two, expand
una
and
aplicación que
translate.
yo quiero
They are the most
probar.
important ones. So
Tengo
let's say that
L62,
I've got here
que es,
L62,
es un local,
which is a local code
y quiero ver
system,
cómo
and I
ese
want to
sistema
see
está
what that is in
puesto en
SNOMED.
ejecutar.
I can execute
Y acá
it,
me dice que se
and it
llama allergia
tells
a
me it's called
amoxicilina.
allergy to
Eso está bien.
amoxicillin.
Yo me meto acá,
That's
acá
if we
está
look here, we
L62,
can go to allergies,
L62,
L62, allergy to
L70,
amoxicillin. If I give you
o allergia a
L77, it should say allergy
acá
to
viene
eggs.
L77,
Let's see, 77, that's what I should get back.
L79. ¿Sí? Pero a su vez, si yo me
Allergy to
meto
egg
acá, este es
protein.
el CIE10, que es
And
CIE10
obviously
normal.
this doesn't have ICD-10, but if I go to
Este
diagnosis, I can see that
acá está
L30
nutrición, ¿no?
is
Sería
malnutrition,
nutrición. Entonces, ¿qué
malnutrition,
puedo hacer?
or undernutrition. So here I can
Buscarlo
look for it, local code L30,
y puedo decir cuál es el código de
and I can
nutrición.
say what's the
Acá
SNOMED
tengo
code,
el
and
de
here I have it, and I've got
L77,
undernutrition, and that's the
pero
code.
yo puedo decir no quiero
But I can
el
also say, no, I don't want
L77.
the SNOMED. I want to see the
Hacer esto,
ICD-10.
vemos
I
que se
execute
cambia
it,
ese
and we
código.
can see that it's K12, which is malnutrition.
Entonces, lo mismo hacemos
So
cuando yo les
the
doy
same way that I did that in
expansión, donde yo
from
le
expansion,
cambiaba
where I
el
changed the
página de frente,
parameter and I made a
también lo
different
hago para los
expansion,
códigos.
I can do that for the
Cuando yo
mapping
quiera, puedo
too.
decir, bueno,
And you can do it in the order that you
ICD-10
wish,
A,
ICD-10 first, and then SNOMED.
entonces este es el K12,
So this is
o
K12.
el K12,
K12,
sería
ICD-10, and I want to see what the SNOMED
agregarlo,
code is.
este es el
And it would be here 6540009 or something. Or I can say I got this SNOMED code
quiero ir
and I
a
want to
versión
see the ICD-10
ICD-10,
code and I
acá va
execute
a
it
ser el
and I
requisition,
can
todo el
see that
código
it's
de
a
versión que quiero.
K12. And then
Entonces,
it
en
also
búsqueda
got
de
a value string, a
de
message.
diagnósticos, utiliza
because it uses the official SNOMED that has lots of additional information. And in this case, it's not a lot, but it could be longer than this. So here we can see how using these two operations, expand and translate, one can do this. You can see the way that each of these things are represented. Another operation that you could do is validating. Let's say, for example, that I've got this code. It was a diagnosis. So if I say this is a diagnosis, and I can I give this code, and I said in SNOMED, this is a SNOMED diagnosis, and it says the result is true. Yes, it is. Inactive? No. Version? This one. So the validate is we receive a code that I do not know, and I ask it, is it a SNOMED code? And Fire will always have this code system, and you can test it. Or for example, we can see whether it's already present in my version. This version that we have here is the same one that we used last year. So we have the 2024 version here, and maybe can share a newer SNOMED code. So when you run this operation, it says this code does not exist. So you can use that, and that's what validate is used for. Lookup is used to get additional information, but that's not that helpful. You can, for example, try it out, but you will see that it might give other synonyms or other relations. You can see that it's got more details. Just some additional information. It's actually quite long. It has, well, the parents and the children of the concepts. You can do that with lookup. So as we were saying, the goal is that this is helpful for you to play around and to say, oh, I understand now how you use it. So you can take this, you can execute it, you can see that this actually works, and you can understand what the parameters are. And then you can say, I need to change these parameters, I can use my application, but the objective is that with all of this, you can use a terminology server with a Fire standardized API to make all the necessary conversions that you may need in order to create standardized documents for the IPS and the vaccine certificate. You can have local codes and you can include them as part of the Excel. You can transform them, you can map them, and you can then understand what the process is like. If you say, we want to take this into production, now I like this model, I want to do that in my country, I want to implement that in production, well, it's the exact same thing, but now what's not going to work is this whole Excel sheet, because that works in a short size. Then you need to have more professional mapping tools where you can put 5,000 codes and you can map all of them automatically. And it's a process. You can also need a process in which you can review and double check. So once all of this is active, then you're going to be able to use a script similar to that of Python, but that can be adapted to what you have created, and you can adapt it. You can see here that the script is here in Fire terminology. This is the Python script. And this is based on the Excel sheet that we invented. If you do 5,000 lines, that's in another a different cell sheet, you're going to have to modify this script in order to do the necessary processes. Or maybe using a tool that might allow you to download the concept map. You might not have to do the script. You can download it directly from the tool. So those are the use cases and the way that you can go, that you can use all of these codes and you can use them in this coding tool in order to run the tests. So please think about how to use this in production. And I know that it's not the exact same Python in production. You will probably need something that's more customized to your needs. And mapping in an Excel sheet is not a good solution when you need to map 100, 200 up to 200 concepts is okay, but after that, you need more professional mapping tools. Okay, so that should give you then the foundation in order to implement this standardized terminology systems, and we're going to continue working with you. The monitors will continue supporting you, and we are available in Slack, and we will also see each other in El Salvador in the Conectaton. Carlos. Thank you, Alejandro. Are there any questions or any doubts? We have a few minutes, if there are any.
¿Aló? ¿Me escucha?
Juan
Sí,
José,
Juan, ¿qué tal?
se te
Hola, yo
escucha.
tengo una pregunta. ¿Se puede?
Sí, claro.
Can I ask a question? Sure.
Quisiera saber,
I would like to know,
son dos preguntas. La primera,
actually, it's two questions. The first one, in production, would you recommend the use of SNOMED in some of the domains instead of going through a thesaurus? Yes, of course. I mean, ideally, that's the way to do it. A thesaurus is used if it existed from before. You have to migrate and you do the SNOMED mapping. But if you start from zero, then the idea is to use SNOMED and then adding descriptions and synonyms to SNOMED in order to adapt it to the local language.
esa era mi pregunta trampa. Ahora
Okay, that was the trick question. Now is the real question.
nuestra
In our implementation, we are already using SNOMED directly. So the fact that we have to go to do a translate concept map would be a little weird if we're using Snow. No, you don't have to do that. Because in the validation last year, it was mandatory. And in the end, I had to implement a quick thesaurus in order to be able to do it. So is it possible that in the validation point, when you're using SNOMED, that it's a validate code or a lookup, something that is not a translate? I don't really know from the point of view of the Conectaton, but I agree with you. You would not have to use a translate. What you would have to do in some cases is getting the ancestor. Because what could happen is that if you choose a Chilean SNOMED, now that you have the Chilean version, that is not the code that is that you need to share in the IPS. You have to use the ancestor that is the closest to the international version. So you need to make that translation, and that is an expand. That's an expand. Yeah, that seems a lot more interesting in our case as a test, and hopefully Carlos should consider this. But our national extension has no diagnosis, so we would be basically be using the international version originally. Well, that's not a problem. But here in the IPS, here we have interoperability demo. This is the example of interoperability, and this has been done with subsets. And it works in the same way. So if you say, give me the ancestors of the concept that are in the IPS, which for you that has an ID module that are from the international version minus the ancestors of the ancestors, then you only get the top layer. And sometimes it's more than just one. So this is done with IPS. So for example, if you put here and epilepsy, remember that this is a ref set, and the country has got to be a member in order to be able to use these IPS, and you need to have the license. But it's being more and more open. So one of the ways of opening is creating a free subset, which is smaller, and that helped in this example. If it's not a part of the free version, then you need to find the ancestor. But for the Nectaton, we are producing the terminology. So for this example, which one should I pick? So for example, if I choose something that's very strange, like visual epilepsy, this executes the ECL. Maybe I didn't do something right in the process, but you should get the closest ancestor. So this is a proximal ancestor selection, the proximal ancestor. So, for example, in the case that Chilean pharmaceutical terminology is used, for example, to get
Claro, exacto, exacto, exacto.
Sí.
Eso.
Ya. Bueno,
yes, yeah, I think you
eso
got it.
genial porque el ejercicio sería
If that's the case, then the exercise, or at
Sí,
least for us,
Ah,
would
ok.
be so much better
Mm.
without having to create a
¿Podemos ver ahí que
thesaurus.
tenemos con diagramado en términos de los
Yes, what
test
we
cases
have
de
in terms of the
IHE
test
con
cases
SDSM
with
y,
IHE are
y el translate?
look up and translate.
Déjame darle una vuelta con el equipo IHE.
Let me
Probablemente
talk to
sí
the
podamos hacer
IHE
algo
team
parecido,
about
sí,
this
no lo
because you
sigo,
will have to
sí,
do some translates.
Por ahí para vacuna.
para
Para
vacunas
vacuna.
sí o sí.
Maybe for
Entonces,
vaccines.
¿no? Realmente, sí lo habíamos considerado, en algún momento sí se ha considerado precisamente pensar eso,
Yes,
¿no? Que el
we had
código
precisely
en
considered this
este caso
that
los
a
cruceros
code is part of the
listos para la terminología.
subsets for this
El
terminology.
lookup o el validate también se pueden
So
incluir.
lookup or
Lookup también es
validator, they are still
DSM,
part
¿no?
of the
DSM.
DSM profile.
Cierto.
Lo que le entiendo a Juan José es que era
Yeah, but what I
obligatorio hacer
understand is that
translate
it was mandatory to do translate, or at least in the last version, it was like that.
Para el caso de este año, bueno,
Yeah, for
estamos
this
viendo
year,
ambas transacciones
we have both
definiendo
transactions
ciertos
for that
estándares
profile, and
comunes
of
que
course, it's
podrían ir
going to
elaborando ahí si en
depend
algún
on how the country has
circunstancia
done
continuamos con el
it.
lookup.
If you're
En
using
el caso de
SNOMED, you
vacunas
use the
sí,
lookup.
respecto al
In the
translate
case of vaccination, we're going to have to use the
monitor también está a
translate. Now,
favor
with the
de
monitor
poder
in
extrapolar
charge, when
quizás algunos
carrying out the
términos
test,
o algunos
that'll be
lenguajes de los
well
subsets
defined for
Por
which of the
ejemplo,
subsets have we, in the same profile, did we evaluate one or the other transaction,
del interior.
depending on how each
Pero
country
podemos
has
hacer
them.
la evaluación
It's part of the
sencillamente
same
con
evaluation because it's
sí,
done on the basis of the profile. So this year, we should be able to have a mix and different to the different countries, depending on how they have it implemented, understanding that you're going to have more homegrown tools. We will check that with Jose Maria, with your monitor internally, so that we can clarify this ahead of time, because probably this part will be a test that we're going to run before the event itself. It is going to be part of the tests that will be left for the virtual Conectathon for that first week.
Ya, estupendo.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Una pregunta de Lucía allí también, que está buena.
There's a question from Lucia also.
perdón, no la vi, está en el chat. No sé, Lucía, igual por qué querés decirla. El SH que carga el servidor.
The SH that's loaded in the server, is it SNOMED or only the IPS? It's all SNOMED. What we have now is the full SNOMED version. But that is because of an agreement. SNOMED is part of the Connectathon. For the purposes, then it'll be open. That version will be open. 365,000 concepts. And if it doesn't exist, it'll tell you here which version it is. That's the version that's loaded. Here it says March and here it says February. We'll have to see.
¿Y ahí conviene actualizar a una versión más nueva
And then you need to update it to a newer version. If it's for a clinical reason, yes. But for the Connectathon, this is perfect. Snowbed is so big that it's just minor changes.
¿Y esta ya tiene cargada el subconjunto de PS?
And this already has the IPS subset. Okay, no, it's not loaded. It doesn't have the members. It would be good, but it doesn't. It has to be done separately. These are called derivatives. When you go to the general browser, if it's interesting for the Connectathon, we might be able to do it. Yeah, because the countries that are not member are going to have that. Yeah, I think it would be good. If I go to this derivatives button, we have all of them here. And this is the one for Daikon. This is Medra. This is the members and the concepts that they use. And this is IPS. which has 11,200. And I think it would be good. It would be good to preload it so that we can use it. Yeah, it would be good. Yeah, we're going to talk to, we're going to see whether we're going to do it.
Sí, estaría buenísimo tener de una vez ese.
Yes, it would be very good to have that.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Nos quedan 3 minutos. Si hay una
We have
pregunta más,
3 more minutes for maybe one brief short question, and if not, we can close the session.
me parece que no.
Okay.
Bien, Alejandro.
So, Alejandro, thank you very much once again.
Estaremos viendo en el
And of
evento.
course, we will see you in the event
Hay
itself.
bastante que trabajar,
There's a lot of
hacia
work to be
capacidades,
done
aún con
when
terminologías y
with the
las
terminology,
próximas
and we
semanas
will see
con
you
otro
next
webinar.
week with a new webinar.
Está alineando los detalles finales,
Fernando is
se lo
putting
iremos
together the
enviando.
final details,
Muchas
and we'll let you know
gracias.
ASAP. Thank you so
Nos
much,
estamos viendo y
and
adelante con el
see
trabajo.
you, and let's keep on working with the technical teams for this year's Conectaton. Bye-bye.
Bien. Gracias. Chao, chao.
Salud.